excited about our next guest today. Peter James has a total of 16 number one Sunday Times bestsellers. He has sold 20 million copies in over 37 languages. And Peter is truly a Renaissance man, as you'll soon find out. Welcome to Thriller Talk, Peter.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Hey, Peter, thanks so much for coming on. As I said before we started here, I'm a huge fan of your work, so this is really exciting. I understand that you're a passionate fan of animals, and you have quite a menagerie. We'd love to hear more about your extended family and what you like most about them.
Sure. Yeah, currently we have 3 dogs, a Labrador, a Labradoodle, and a Golden Doodle. We have 5 alpacas. We have 2 emus. We have 4 pygmy goats. 2 are named after fine wines, Busco and Margot, and 2 are named after serial killers, Ted and Norman. We have 37 Indian runner ducks. We have 2 Burmese cats that think they're dogs and come for walks with me every morning along with the dogs for 2 miles around the fields. We have 2 rabbits. We have about 20 hens. I think I've included them all. If I haven't, they'll let me know. And do you know what I love most is about having animals is that they're non-judgmental. I mean, I think cats are judgmental. I always joke the difference between a cat and a dog is that if you went out and murdered somebody, you come home, your dog will jump up and down and lick you. The cat will look at you and know you've done it. But on a more serious note, whenever anything really horrible happens in the world, I remember a couple of years back, we had the awful Manchester bombing in England. And I went out in the morning and hand-fed the alpacas carrots and gave grapes to the emus. And they don't know all this terrible shit that goes on in the world. They're just there, and they're really grounding. I found it wonderful just to stand with the goats like I did this morning in the pelting rain and stroking them. And they love popcorn and ginger biscuits. If you ever happen to meet a pygmy goat.
I love it. That sounds like a wonderful family and definitely something that grounds us all. And so, Peter, in addition to being a talented and prolific author, I understand you have a background in the film industry. And rumor has it that you were a house cleaner at one time for Orson Welles. Do you have any fun stories from that time?
Well, what happened was I was at film school. I was a student at film school in London, and my dad gave me just enough money to pay for my rent and the petrol to get to college and food. And I met this very posh girl that I wanted to invite out. And I thought, I need some money. I wanted to take her to the Mirabelle, which is London's most expensive restaurant at the time. And I saw an advert in the window. It said, cleaner wanted, apply Mrs. Wells. And it was 10 shillings an hour, which I guess is about $1 an hour. It was probably about the equivalent of maybe £10 an hour and $10 in real money. Anyway, I went round to the address. It was just off the kind of Fulham Road, on the border of Fulham and Chelsea. Not a grand house, a nice terrace house. And this quite elegant woman in her 40s, I guess, said, I was really expecting a lady to come. And I said, I can clean, honestly. And she said, all right, I'll give you 3 hours trial this morning. I'll pay you 10 shillings an hour. Can you clean the kitchen? And she put me in the kitchen. And I had no idea what to do. And none at all. And I frantically looked around the cupboards and I found a packet of something called Flash. And there used to be a TV advert, which was all around the house, sprinkling with Flash. So I mixed this up, I followed the instructions, and I cleaned the kitchen with this stuff. And she came back and she was really impressed. And she said, okay, I'll take you on a full month's trial, 3 mornings a week, 4 hours in the morning. I thought, wow, this is fortune. So she asked me to start 2 days' time. So I rocked up there, it's like I think a Thursday. And she wanted me to clean the skirting board. I don't know if you call that the same in North America. It's the wooden board just on separates the wall from the floor in the hallway. And so I was on my knees in the hallway cleaning the skirting board, and suddenly all the mail came through the letterbox. So I dutifully scooped it up. And I noticed it was all addressed to Orson Welles. I'm not always the sharpest tack in the box. So I didn't connect Orson Welles to this is Mrs. Wells. I thought, idiot postman, he's put this through the wrong letterbox. And that moment, the front door opened and in came the great man, wearing a long coat and a big kind of one of those big black hats. And he looked down at me like I was something the cat dropped. And I was just awestruck. There was a million things I wanted to say to him, like, "Hi, I'm a film student. I want to get in the film business. Could you give me any advice? Could you help me?" And I just went, and he stepped over me and went up the stairs and disappeared. And I didn't see him the rest of that morning. And I arrived the next day really excited, and he'd gone off to America, and I never saw him again. And at the end of 4 weeks, Mrs. Wells very sweetly said to me, she said, I just don't really think you're cut out for this, are you?
It's a great story, though.
Thank you.
And Peter, when you've had a lot of experience, with screenwriting, and what are the pros and cons between writing novels and writing for visual media like film and TV?
There is no contest. Hang yourself, cut your own head off, rather than go and write for film or television. I spent 20 years of my life doing it. But seriously, the big difference is that when you make film or television, there are 20 people who all claim ownership. That's in terms of the finished product. You'll have 3 or 4 executive producers, 2 producers who all say, "It's my film, darling." The director says, "Actually, it's my film, darling." Scriptwriter says, "Well, actually, I wrote it. Don't I get some credit?" Your 4 lead actors say, "Actually, it's our film, darling." The director of photography, who's already said it's my film, darling, is then usurped by the lighting cameraman who says, "Actually, it's my film." And then the production designer says, "The film is complete shite. It's my film. I made it look great." Then the editor says, "It was complete fucking disaster. I saved it by cutting it." Then the composer says, "This film was shit until I put the music on." And then the distributor says, "We don't like the ending. Can you reshoot it?" So you have all that going on. But before you even get to that, as a writer, you're dealing with, if you're lucky, 11-year-olds, most likely 4-year-olds, studio executives, who've only read the coverage of your script but decide they actually want to make changes. So you're going through draft after draft after draft, edited by people that have about as much intelligence as a pop-up toaster. Whereas when you write a novel, you're actually dealing with people who love books. People work in publishing. They are generally far less better paid than the movie and television industry. They do it because it's a job they love. It's a passion. So when your editor on your novel says, "I think this maybe doesn't work," you listen to her because you know that maybe she's got a really good point. But the essential nut difference between writing for television or movies and writing books is that whereas in television or film, you have to constantly change. In a book, you've delivered that book. Ryan, you know that, and Kimberly, you know that. You do not actually have to change one single word if you don't want to. And that's the big difference.
Great answer. It's really great. The closest I could come to with an example of someone taking credit in the publishing world, I do have a writer friend who probably, I think it was 5 or 6 books in, sold really well, and I won't name anyone, but their publisher came back and said, "Yeah, we really think it had a lot to do with that cover." Right? It was the cover that they put on it that helped it sell so well. So I still tease them about that today.
Well, Peter, I love the fact that you're as passionate about research as I am, and that you've done, things like hang out with spiders and do ride-alongs, as you mentioned, with the police. Have you ever said to yourself, "Peter, I think you've gone too far"?
Yes, a few times. I think the worst was when I wrote the first Roy Grace novel, Dead Simple. And the book begins with a bachelor party gone wrong, where the groom has always played terrible pranks on his friends, and they decide to pay him back big time by burying him alive in a coffin for a couple of hours. So they take him on a pub crawl, get him drunk, drive him out to local woods where they've already dug a grave. And they put him in a coffin, lower him in, cover it up, and they leave him with a bottle of whiskey, a walkie-talkie, and a porno magazine. And they get in their van and they're joking and they're saying, "We're going to come back in 2 hours' time, pick you up." And they all get wiped out in a wreck. And so Michael is then trapped in the coffin underground. And there's only one person who knows where he is, and that person has a very good reason for keeping quiet. And I wanted to, so for much of the book, Michael is trapped inside the coffin. So I wanted to get a feeling, what was it like to be in a coffin? It's luckily something most of us don't get to experience more than once in our time on this planet. So I contacted a local firm of undertakers. It was in a country town near Brighton, a family business. And I said, would you mind if I came out, you put me in a coffin, I want the lid to be screwed down, I want to be left for 30 minutes. And they said, okay. So I arranged all this, and I rocked up there at 10 o'clock a few days later. And all the family had gone out. They'd gone to funerals, to collect bodies, whatever. And the only person there was like the great granddad, who was nudging 90. And he said, oh, well, yes, you've come to be put in a coffin, haven't you? And I said, yes. He said, anyhow, they're not that easy to get into, because it's, I can imagine, I don't know why, it'd be like, sweet at Thriller Fest Hyatt or something. Coffin's actually quite small. And anyway, he kind of helped me into it. He said, you sure you want the lid to go on? I said, please. So he puts the lid on, and then I could hear the screwdriver going, and it's pitch dark, and I'm sitting there like this. And I suddenly thought, he's going to come back in half an hour. And I checked with a coroner that I knew that how much air you had in the coffin. And he told me you've got 3 to 4 hours on a well-made coffin, but much less if you hyperventilate. You could bring that down to 40 minutes. And I started panicking. First thing I'm thinking, is that a spider in here? And then the next thing I think, what if he goes across the road to Starbucks and gets run over, or he just drops dead? And it was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I'm thinking, what are you doing in here?
Wow.
But it did help me get the feeling right of claustrophobia right.
That is my worst nightmare. I mean, there'd have been about 5 minutes of oxygen in that casket if it was me in there. I'd be hyperventilating so bad. And what's funny is you're telling us a story. I keep thinking they must have a story that they tell too, right? They're probably telling all their friends. This guy once called us alive and wanted to get into a casket and have us shut him in there. They probably
Yeah.
have their own great story out of this. That
Poor
is
sap, poor sap, totally crazy.
doing some research. Wow. Peter, it's fun that your Roy Grace novels all have the word dead in the title. How do you come up with the titles? And are you ever at all worried you might run out of title ideas?
Every time I've come up with a new one, I think, God, that took so long. What happened was that my very early novels had one word title. I had a book called Possession, uh, Twilight, Dreamer, Alchemist. And within a very short space of time, those titles reappeared. There was A.S. Bart came out with Possession, Twilight, we all know, Paul Coelho with Alchemist, because there's no copyright, as you guys know, in a title. Um, um, when I wrote my first Roy Grace novel, I'd always had Dead Simple as a title. I just loved it I loved that title, Blood Simple, for the movie years back. And I always thought Dead Simple, and to my amazement, nobody had ever used this title. And then I just finished Dead Simple, and I was planning the next book, and the title just popped in my head of Looking Good Dead. And it kind of made my publisher smile, and it really fitted the dark side of the story. So that came out, and I started getting emails from kind of fans saying, oh, is this going to be the Dead series? And I thought, yeah, why not? And I just thought maybe it would be nice to have a kind of theme that if people see that word, that there is some kind of association with my books. But it does always get harder, particularly as a lot of writers use that word as well. I don't have a monopoly on the word dead. So I've just been working on the next one at the moment, but I love the challenge, and when it pops, and I think yes, because I think titles are important. I think I think the 3 most important things for a stranger coming to your work or Kimberly's work or my work is the cover, the title, um, the blurb, and then the 4th, but probably the most important of all, is that first line of the book.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nice sunny day and the birds are thinking, nope, bin. That first line is so utterly critical.
I love it, and I think it's great to have a theme. It also seems to have worked very well for John Sandford with his Prey series. So I think it's immediately identifiable, even if they don't remember the author's name, let's say, but they remember the word. Then it's another way of them finding you. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm Sue Grafton again with her alphabet series. It's fun too.
Janet Ivanovich with the numbers. My wife and I are both fans of hers, and it's easy to go, oh, the 12th one. You don't always remember the title, but she's got the number in the title. I think that's awesome.
Of course, yeah, that is clever.
Yeah.
I guess the only negative is if somebody knows it's a series and they think, oh, is there any point coming in halfway? Do I need to start at the first one? That's the only downside to it.
Well said. So, Peter, you're a self-confessed petrol head, as they say in the UK, and that's something we bonded over. You're a huge fan of cars and racing, and I wondered if you could share with us your most cherished memory in your history of, motoring.
Wow. Got so many. I love just long drives. There's a wonderful drive if anyone ever gets to the south of France, which is it's the route that Hannibal took through the Alps, and if you drive that, and it's called sorry, not Hannibal, Napoleon. It's called the Route Napoleon, and it goes from Jean-le-Pin, south of France, up to almost to Lake Annecy. Probably my most memorable of all, and my life-changing one, was I had a very big accident in 2013. I was racing a 1965. I tend to race classic cars. I currently race a 1962 Corvette C1, which I'm racing at Goodwood in 2 weeks' time. Really looking forward to. But I was racing at Brands Hatch, which is an English motor race circuit. And I was doing about 95 miles an hour, and I got tapped from behind, pushed into the curb, and my car barrel rolled 4 times. And I always advertised my books on the car, and the book that was on that car was Dead Man's Time. And the car ended up completely planted in the gravel, missing. Luckily, it had a strong roll cage, but the car was totaled. And I was helped out of the wreckage by this marshal. And he looked at the back and he said, "Obviously not your time, sir."
Wow. I'm really glad you were safe.
But it's hard. It had a massive impact on me. I did have a number of injuries, but my then partner, and I wasn't in a very good relationship at that time, said to me, "Well, when are you going to stop this stupid racing? You've got to realize you're an old man now." Well, that was the end of our relationship. I started a whole new relationship, and it made me think. Made me think about age, and I thought, you know what? Actually, I don't want to be an old man. I'm not Peter Pan, but I think one of the great things about being a writer, something Harold Hitchcock said years ago. He said, "There's only 3 things an old man can do with dignity: conduct an orchestra, direct a motion picture, or write a novel."
I picture you having already been in a casket saying, "I've already tried that and I don't like it. So I'm gonna go live and have some fun then."
Yeah, conducting the orchestra, nah, didn't work. But and it's interesting about writing an age, and I'm not just saying that as I sort of get older, but I think that if you look at the bestseller list, New York Times, Sunday Times, any week of the year, probably half, if not more, of those authors on that list are north of 50, 60, 70, 80, and even 90 sometimes.
Yep.
I think people don't just read a book to get a page-turning story. They're also reading it to learn about the human condition, the world in which we live, and the wisdom of the writer. And hopefully, you, Ryan, you, Kimberly, and me, we get wiser as we get older.
I sure hope so. I mean, I'm really counting on it. We'll see.
I doubt it personally sometimes, but I try.
Well, Peter, you have this great, spectacular office with a view just to kill for. We're going to have you back on to show readers that, because you treated that to us before we got going here, and it is fantastic. I'm super jealous, by the way. But I want to know, what is your writing process like? And do you have advice for new authors?
Sure. Advice for new authors is, I guess there's two key pieces of advice. One is to remember that writing is a craft, and that whatever craft you're learning, there's no shame in trying to look at other writers. You know, if you were training to be a car mechanic, you would take a car to pieces, you take the engine to pieces, figure out how it worked. If you're going to be a doctor, you take a cadaver to pieces. You literally, you know, you do the dissection, you learn how every single muscle, sinew, organ works in that body. And I used to do this before I started, right, when I started, you know, I'd take my favorite books and I'd literally deconstruct them. You know, how did that author, you know, I remember taking The Shining, I remember taking um, Rosemary's Baby, and also Silence of the Lambs, and how did Thomas Harris engage me with those characters? You know, how did he hook me? How did he keep us riveted? I think we learn an awful lot from our peers. And then the other thing to remember for anyone starting out is that I believe in writing there is an absolute inseparable trinity of three things, which is cast, right, character, research, plot. And character is the most important because we read books to find out what happens to characters that we meet right at the very start, maybe even in the first line, and get to care about. We don't have to love them. You know, we don't love Hannibal Lecter, but you know, we find him engaging. Um, Characters are absolutely key. And secondly, I put research second because everyone who reads is intelligent. And as I just said, that people like to learn about the world, about life. And they need to know that the author knows what he or she is writing. They need to know that author is completely conversant with their subject. If they feel the author doesn't know something, you rapidly lose, doesn't matter how good the plot is, you won't ultimately read on. So that's why I put plot third. Plot's important. You have a great character. You know, Elmore Leonard is somebody who writes great characters. You know, I could have an Elmore Leonard character reading the phone directory for 300 pages, and I think I'd still be engaged. In terms of my own writing process, I guess I have a slightly back to front day because I used to write in whatever time I could find when I was working in film and television. And so I start at 6 o'clock in the evening, my creative process. A stiff drink, usually a vodka martini with 4 olives, put on music, and I just get in the zone for about 2.5 to 3 hours. Then switch off and have supper and have a meal and watch television with my wife. And then in the morning, I'm quite an early bird, and I always take the dogs out, go for a run, or do some form of exercise. And then I hunker down about 10 o'clock and read what I wrote the night before and edit it, and usually add to it. I always try and write a chapter during that evening so that I've got a new chapter to be thinking about overnight, and then go back to that original chapter and revise it. And I do that 6 days a week from the time I start writing the novel until the time I finish the first draft, which is usually about 7 months.
That's incredible, Peter. Fascinating. And I'd love to delve into your standalone novel, I Follow You. And technology is a big part of our life these days, and so many people are using, different devices for fitness. Your incredible wife, Lara, is an avid runner, and I understand you got the idea or the story because of something that happened to Lara. Would you mind telling us about that?
Sure, yeah. It was about 3 years ago. Laura she's done 13 marathons, and she started using the Strava running app. And she came home one day this was before we were living in Jersey, when we were living in Sussex, out in the countryside. And she'd been running, and it was early evening in winter. And she said that, just waved at another runner as runners do. And she said, and I got home and there was a ping, and this guy started following me. And then over the next 3 weeks, she noticed that every time she went out running, he'd be posting almost the same route and she was running down at night down country lanes, occasionally woodland tracks. And she said, "This is getting quite creepy because he obviously knows where I live because where I start and finish from." And she said, it's amazing how much information that we just put out on social media. And that gave me the idea for the book. And then when we moved to Jersey, I was thinking about it. And then it happened again. She was running one evening, waved at a jogger, waved back. An hour later, she gets home, ping, and he started to follow her. And I follow you. I've always wanted to write about obsession. And also, I've always been fascinated. I've written a few books set in the medical world. And the people in the medical world who I find most intriguing are the consultants, who are often very arrogant people who kind of put themselves almost in a godlike position. And, we trust doctors, we trust consultants implicitly with our lives. And in in the situation of I follow you, that trust gets kind of turned on its head because my consultant, a guy called Marcus Valentine, he's a senior consultant obstetrician at the hospital in Jersey, loved by his patients, although some of the staff think he's a little bit arrogant. And he's driving to work one morning, very late, glances down at his phone, and he looks up, there's a woman running right in front of him across the road. She's got a green light. There's a red light against him, which he hasn't seen. It just stops 1 inch from her, and he's in a black Porsche. And she goes, "Dickhead," and runs on. And he just is transfixed. She reminds him incredibly of this girl that he was absolutely infatuated with when he was 16, who dumped him in favor of a biker. And he wonders, could this be her, 25 years on? And he spins his car around at the first opportunity, drives back, and she's running along the seafront path, and he surreptitiously takes some photographs of her. And by sheer chance, he then meets her 2 weeks later and discovers she's a personal trainer and a keen runner. And he used to run years ago, so he starts running again and gets the running app and starts following her on this running app, taking her routes. And he becomes increasingly obsessed with her. She's pregnant, she's got a fiance, and he starts planning ways of dealing with both of those. And that's kind of the setup for the book.
It's terrifying, by the way. I mean, it's because it could happen because it is so real. Peter, thank you for coming on. Before we let you go, though, I want to know, can you tell us anything about what you're working on right now?
Sure, yeah. I'm nearly at the end of my 17th Roy Grace novel. I haven't yet got the title for it, but will do shortly. And I love writing what I kind of call the everyday sinisters. It's things that could happen to anyone. And I've often wondered, when I dropped my wife off at a store, what happened if I never saw her again? And so I've got this situation. The book starts with it's a Sunday afternoon. This couple, they've been out in the country, and they need cat litter. And she asks him if he'd stop at a store so she could rush in and get a couple of sacks of cat litter. So he stops outside this big store. She runs in, and she never comes back out. And that's the kind of starting point of the book.
That sounds incredible. I can't wait to dive into both of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited too. That sounds fat. Of course, I keep wondering. You wanted to know what the inside of a coffin was like, and you went and got him. Well, you didn't drop your wife off and say you need to disappear for like 3 days, and I'll see you 72 hours, right? You didn't make her run into the store and go somewhere.
See you in 15 years.
Yeah, right.
If you can hide.
Well, thank you again for coming on today, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will definitely come back to visit that beautiful office and get a tour. And thanks for taking. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, great to talk to you both as well.
Now, thanks for coming on, Peter. I know we had fun.
Oh, thanks, Ron. Me too. That's great to talk.